In this video, we'll start from building scene for our basic geometry setup, and then we go through the process and customize our base setup to create some variation and to have handy manipulation with our elements. Let's start and create cube. I set width and in X, in Z similar, and in R19 and all other versions above there is an instrument that called Voronoi fracture. We drop our cube as a child to it and it cuts, create a lot of elements. Let me go to here, filter all, so to see everything, going to sources, and it has very simple setup. It has sources which contain different points. We can create a lot of them. We can change distribution type from uniform, for example, to normal, from inside to outside, from outside to inner, and you can change the derivation or create a lot of segments at the center and big chunks from the outside at the auto boundaries. Then you have inverse normal, you'll see the opposite result, so big chunks in center. And exponential, you can set axis affection, for example plus x or minus. You can off it plus y or y axis, z axis, so y will go here. We need to set big, high. So this is very simple instrument, and we need some tips and methods how to art direct this. I remove all this stuff and create MoGraph matrix object. This is our matrix. I set size to 1000 and 1000 equal to our square, and set 0 elements on y-axis. So this is very simple, and drop this thing to sources, and you'll see that we have controlled cutting. So if we move our matrix, we'll see the change in geometry. If we add some elements, we add some cuts. So if we want straight cuts, we have to create simple line. Now if we rotate this thing, we can manage our cutting direction. And let's create simple radial element. Then we create one more matrix, drop it here, extend the radius, and you'll see we'll start to get something interesting. I'll set to the 6, create new one, add to source, extend like this, and you have some pretty usable pattern. I create camera, set it to the perspective, or if you want flat surface, going to top, and when you render you'll have this flat image with no perspective. Or I can set very big focal length, for example 135 millimeters, go to chords, change angle to -90, and of course no X on Z position. So it's straight to the top, go to our output, select the same height and width, so we have square, and manage this thing to our geometry. So this is very basic setup, and you'll see if we change metrics, we can change our kind of ornament and result we'll get. In Voronoi fracture, we can go to object, we can off colorize fragments, and we can offset our segments, so to get this kind of render. So if we render, we'll get this kind of result. This is the basic setup, so we'll have to keep up with this technique, improving and creating more complex result in next videos. With building basic setup, we can play with it, and I'll show you how to create something more complex, or how to art direct this. We're going to display, go to hidden line just to see our structure, and I use Control or Command R for rendering and Shift R for extend render. So you can save this image or animation if you want for your further using. Be sure you have set alpha channel this checkbox. So we have 3 metrics, and now we can move this here, change the radius, and you'll get something like flowering. Now we can get big one, then add more, one more, going to source, extend, so I use 6, maybe 24, and there is kind of new type of segmentation. And this kind of layering this stuff, so we can click this red dark triangle for maximizing this window, and we can extend, and you'll see that if we use kind of proportions, so maybe 72, 6 multiplied by 6 by 2, we can have very beautiful symmetric elements here. So I'd like to add some more cuts, multiply by 2, extend radius, maybe like this, so not to pass the boundaries of the frame, and you'll see it's very handy. And this offset can be set to big one, so we lost some of our chunks, and you can render with small elements and then compose it. So I'll render small animation. I'll animate these offset fragments from 1 to this 5 frame to maybe 6 or even 20, maybe 30. Shrink timeline 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I think I even need 3 or 4 frames. Base, cut, and yes, kind of like this. So 3. And I'll set the name so it will render near the C4D file. So all you have to do is find it there. So we can go to Voronoi, segments. I'll set to maybe 1024. Alpha, going to anti-aliasing. We don't use textures, so we can keep everything is set by default. And hit render. But before we hit render, I have to set all frames. So we have small animation. 1, 2, 3. It's very fast. And now we can dive into the Photoshop, and I'll show you how we can use this thing. So, a little review. Using stack of matrices, you can create very complex and randomly looking elements. So by on and off it, we can create new elements, and if you use the proportion, for example, I use 6, then that's not very good, I think, but let's re-render. So 6 and 6 multiplied by 8, 48. 6 multiplied by 4, 24. So we keep these straight lines here. And okay, re-render, and going to Photoshop. In Photoshop, I can use Alpha, Control click, Control C, Control V, Control C, Control V, and last one, going to Alpha, Control click, Control C, Control V. And I'll create some maybe solid color. With Alt click, set to parent, new, and now we can use some of our elements, and I need the basic one, so I unlock it, Control click, create mask, new mask, like this, and I'll create maybe dark blue background for these lines. Now I go in here, and we can set our color maybe to blue, light blue. Then we're going to unsolo the next element, double click, I use this kind of, create blue. I think we can have something like adjustment or properties, double click, blue, and one more element here. And now you can separate this thing, rearrange it, I think like this, so in the opposite order, and create some beautiful elements. So you can have all these controls with all that stuff that you rendered. So you can add opacity with guide layers, you can change colors, and of course you can change the outlines. And if you dislike and it's very complex for you, you can, for example, disable some of layers to simplify your design. So I can use this one, and for example, no, this one, like this one. And of course you can go to the group, create new mask, go into gradient, set to overlaying, maybe like this, and to play with it. So it's very handy to composite. Let me go and delete this group, and to manage all that stuff with Photoshop in few clicks. So after creating something like this, and you may face the situation when you need to color all this thing and not to have this black and white for further compositing in Photoshop or in After Effects, and you need to color something like in cinema. And you can do this very simple. If you have a family with more graph, we can add to Voronoi fracture effectors that can recolor our elements or fields in further version. So I go into shader effector, go into parameter, disable scale, disable alpha, and set color mode. Go into shading, go into noise, and if you render, you'll see that we have grayscale value. Now you can go to noise and you can change, for example, contrast, scale, and you'll get another result. And you can go to the filter, or not filter, but colorizer, and use gradient or pre-made gradients, for example like this, so pre-made gammas, and create something like this. And of course you can use not only noise but any coloring shader, so for example gradient, and get another result. You can go to gradient and change type and get new result, and diagonal, new result, radial and circular, and you can manage and art direct this thing as you want. So you can create, for example, double notes, something like this, and you'll get some white zones, some color zones. And to see the immediate response, I go into this section, and here I see interactive render region. We can manage to fit our zone. Here we have this little triangle that create bad quality or set high quality of preview. We can set it to middle, and now you can in real time matching colors. So for example, I wanted some green, and I'll have green elements. Go into gradient, I can add some turbulence, you'll see, and we have end radial and some noise variation in form, so we have a lot of colors, or we can have straight. For example, go into gradient, strafe, 1, 2 minimal colors, because we don't have this semi-interpolation in color. So we can go to cubic nodes and we have smooth transition, or we can set to none and get something like this, and by hand we can add these gray values, and you can fully control your elements. So let me reset to default, going to our gradient, and I want to show you one more thing, that we can go to our fracture and add our effectors to control the scale. So I can go to the plane effector, going to scale, uniform scale, and we can shrink down elements. And to follow or fields in further version, we can go set to the, for example, torus, and scale it up just to cover proper segments. So I can shrink down the radius up a bit. Then I add new plane effector. Be sure it added to effectors. Shrink down the scale, or you can use radius. Not radius, but the scale. I prefer to use scale. Scale, and like this. Set to high fall off, that we have the smooth interpolation of scaling, and you'll see that we can control every element in our scene, starting from the color and ending with, let me add some turbulence, I think it looks more interesting a bit, and change our preset, for example, to this, or maybe to rainbow, and this is what we have. And if you dislike some of the color, of course you can delete this element and you'll remove, for example, the gray or dark coloring. Of course you can duplicate double nodes and create more variation, more coloring. Setting up proper color interpretation gradient, you'll get very random looking result. Hope this simple technique will help you to get great symmetry and these mathematical ornaments, and to bring them to your work. As a small bonus, I want to show you one more thing that you can create with this setup. I'll remove all plane effectors, and going to shader, I'll create only noise shader. So let's check. So I like this gray value, and now we can go to this shader effector, go into parameter, go into scale, we'll go out of camera, disable uniform scale, and going to only scale on y-axis, and you'll see that we have this random looking extrusion. As I said, we can use not only noise, but we can use gradient, let's start from circular. We can add some turbulence for some randomization, you'll see. A little randomization. And when we render, we'll see that flat look. That's not good, that's not interesting, we already did this. I upscale a bit, create plane, very wide plane, so it covers all these holes between elements, and I go and create, for example, area light, and move it up, area, shadow to area, and if I render this, I'll have to put it up. We'll see that we have not only our 2D elements, but some shadows. And you can create, for example, several lights. I use red at the right and blue on the left. I go to details and set fall off to inverse square, so it's physically accurate. So lower the radius because it will burn very strength. And now you'll see that we have very beautiful image with different colors, and almost no black. I don't want to dive into the settings, but to improve our lights, we go into shadow, and sometimes we need to up maximum levels, maximum samples. So, for example, 256. It's up to you, you have to check this thing. So you have to know that we have maximum samples. And now we're going to anti-aliasing is set to best. Of course, you can go and find tutorials about optimization, but if you need to still shots, I think it's not very speed depending task. So we can wait, for example, for a few seconds more to get beautiful render. And one more trick, so if you have powerful PC, let me add one more area light. For example, I create something green, area light, inverse fall-off, up this thing. I don't use any material, so we have green and all elements are there, and we can have still the dark areas. So we're waiting for the render. And if you want to remove all that dark elements, dark zones, so you'll see there are something. We can add effect called global illumination. There are a lot of settings here, but you can try to use some preset which can produce beautiful image with no artifacts and good quality. So just go in here. If you don't want, and if you can wait, we're going to QMC, setting gamma to 2.2, going to samples, going to custom sample count, and I think if we multiply by 2, these kind of settings will help you to produce very clean result. But you'll see that speed is decreasing. To see what light, what color, we go into basic and icon color, set icon color. I think green is not very good. We can go to our circle, set this triangle, and we use red and blue. And of course, it shows that we can use green, but I'd like to use maybe some orange. And now I hit render and wait a bit so to see what kind of result we'll get. The higher speed of your CPU, the faster the render will be. And the global illumination take a lot of time to calculate. You can check your image without global illumination. Sometimes you don't need this effect and you will get very huge speed increase. So you'll see we have 40 seconds and we see a small part. I go into global illumination, uncheck this thing, going to our lights, going to shadows, maximum samples set to 100, and I lower accuracy a bit, for example 55. And let's start, and you'll see that we have the same zone ready almost in 10 seconds, not 40 seconds. And now you can compromise with speed and quality by changing maximum samples and accuracy for shadows and turning on and off global illumination. You can use presets, or you can just pump up QMC algorithm and get beautiful results. This is everything I want to show you in this course, and now you can create 2D ornaments for further compositing in Photoshop or in After Effects, and you can create 3D elements in Cinema 4D with no plugins.